I'm Charlotte Morgan. I'm 42 years old, and at my own father's 70th birthday dinner, a party I planned and was paying for, my family gave my seat away to my brother's girlfriend of 2 weeks. Before I tell you how their faces turned ghost white when the bill for that dinner arrived, do me a favor and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. It's always incredible to me to see how far these stories can travel. The air in the Roman restaurant was thick with the scent of white truffle and centuries of old money. La Pergola, 3 Michelin stars, a view over the eternal city that could make a queen weep, and a reservation list that was practically a closed book. I'd had to pull every string I had, leverage every professional courtesy I'd ever earned to secure this place for my father, Richard's 70th birthday. This entire week-long trip to Rome, in fact, was my creation. A grand, impossibly expensive gesture. A final, foolhardy attempt to earn a place in a family that had always treated me like a necessary but inconvenient piece of furniture. I was wearing a Tom Ford dress that had cost more than my first car, a silent armor for the evening ahead. I wanted to look the part, the successful daughter, the woman who had made it. I nodded to the maitre d', Marco, a man whose clipped professional tones I'd come to know well over weeks of transatlantic calls. He greeted me with a seamless blend of professional warmth and deference. "Ms. Morgan, welcome. Your family has already been seated on the terrace." A flicker of hope, stubborn and foolish, sparked in my chest. Maybe tonight would be different. I walked through the opulent dining room. The clink of crystal and the low, confident hum of conversation buzzed around me. I stepped onto the terrace. The view of St. Peter's Basilica glowing under a velvet night sky was a masterpiece. My family was seated at the best table, a large round one framed by lush greenery. They were laughing. My father, Richard, at the head, expansive and proud. My mother, Eleanor, beside him, her diamonds catching the candlelight. My younger brother, Jason, the golden child, the sun around which the Morgan family orbited, was draped over his new girlfriend, a stunningly beautiful but vacant-looking girl named Vanessa. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, was there too, her eyes darting around, taking everything in. They were all there, and as I drew closer, a cold dread began to seep into my bones, chilling the faint warmth of hope. I counted the chairs, then I counted them again. Someone was missing from the equation. That someone was me. There was no seat for me at my own father's birthday table. Jason saw me first. A slow, lazy smirk spread across his handsome face. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." The party planner finally arrives to check on her work. My mother turned, her smile as bright and brittle as spun glass. "Charlotte, darling, there you are." She gestured vaguely at the full table, a perfect picture of familial bliss, from which I was explicitly excluded. Now me, I kept my voice steady, a Herculean effort. "Mom, there seems to be a mistake. There's no place for me." Eleanor's smile didn't falter. It widened, taking on a sharp, cruel edge. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, Charlotte. We needed the room for Jason's new girlfriend. Vanessa, we simply had to make her feel welcome, you understand?" It wasn't a question, it was a command. And as if on cue, a wave of soft, polite laughter rippled around the table. It wasn't a mistake, it was a message, a punchline. And for the 42nd year of my life, I was the joke. I looked at my father, searching his face for any sign of support, of protest. He just gave a slight shrug, a minute gesture of dismissal that screamed volumes. "This is your place, daughter. On the outside, looking in." Something inside me, a fragile, hopeful thing I had been protecting for my entire life, finally shattered. It didn't make a sound. It just turned to dust. I stood there for a heartbeat, the glorious Rome skyline blurring behind them. Then a strange and terrible calm settled over me. I gave them a small, tight smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Seems I'm not family," I said, my voice barely a whisper. Yet it cut through their laughter like a razor. I turned to Marco, who had followed me out and was watching the scene unfold with a look of deep professional concern. I spoke to him, but my words were a declaration of war aimed squarely at my family. "Marco," I said, my voice changing, shedding all traces of the hurt daughter and adopting the crisp authority of a CEO. "It appears there has been a change in the guest list. From this moment on, please direct all inquiries, all requests, and all charges to the party's host, Mr. Richard Morgan." I met my father's confused, reeling gaze. "I will return later," I said, my words deliberate and cold, "to settle the final financial arrangements." And with that, I turned my back on them and walked out of the light of the terrace and into the shadows of the restaurant. They thought I was being emotional. They thought I was throwing a childish tantrum. They didn't understand. I wasn't just leaving a party. I was detonating a bomb I didn't even know I had been building for months. And I was about to walk away from the blast zone. This whole Roman catastrophe began, as most disasters in my life did, with a phone call from my mother 3 months earlier. Her voice was syrupy sweet, a tone I had come to recognize as her prelude to a significant and usually one-sided request. "Charlotte, darling," she'd begun, the sound of her stirring tea clinking in the background. "You know your father's big birthday is coming up. The big 7-0, a real milestone." I was in my Boston office, the sleek, minimalist headquarters of Elite Affairs, the event planning company I had scraped and fought to build from nothing. The wall to my right was covered in awards and features in glossy magazines. To my parents, it was a cute little hobby that kept me busy. I was staring at a complex logistical layout for a tech billionaire's wedding in Lake Como, a multi-day, multi-venue affair that made my brain hum with happy energy. "I'm aware, Mom," I said, my focus already fractured. "Well," she continued, a dramatic sigh rustling through the phone line, "we were thinking something truly special, something memorable. Your father has always dreamed of spending his 70th in Rome." A familiar knot, cold and heavy, tightened in my stomach. "Rome is a significant undertaking, Mom. That's a destination event, not a weekend party." "Oh, I know, and that's precisely why we need you. You're so brilliant at this sort of thing, Charlotte. It would mean the world to your father, a real family celebration planned by his own successful daughter." There it was, the hook, the lure, the expertly dangled bait. The suggestion that this time, my skills, my professional success, would finally be acknowledged as something more than a curiosity. My business partner and best friend, Sarah, was sitting across from my desk reviewing vendor contracts. She heard the change in my tone and looked up, her expression immediately weary. She'd seen this movie before. She knew how it ended. She was already shaking her head, mouthing the word, no. But then my father got on the line, his voice, a bluff, hearty baritone that he used to close deals or intimidate service staff. "Charlotte, my girl, your mother is right. And listen, there's something in it for you, too. I happen to know that Robert Davenport is in our circles now. Yes. The CEO of Davenport Capital. I hear through the grapevine you've been trying to get a meeting with him for ages. Well, I can make that happen. He's a traditionalist, loves the idea of family. He'll be in Rome the same week. Imagine it. A word from me at the club. A casual introduction at a family dinner. Think of it, my girl. The Morgans and Davenport. A partnership for the ages." That was the nail in the coffin. Davenport was the white whale of corporate event planning. Landing his company's massive annual conferences and extravagant retreats would elevate Elite Affairs into a new stratosphere. My father knew it, and he dangled it in front of me like a perfectly ripe fruit. So, against every screaming instinct in my body, against Sarah's frantic, silent protests, I said, "Yes, fine," the words tasting like surrender. "I'll do it." Sarah waited until I hung up, her pen tapping a sharp, angry rhythm on her notepad. "You know this is a trap, right, Char?" she said. "A beautifully wrapped, Italian, leather-scented trap. You know how this story ends. It always ends with you paying the bill, emotionally and financially." "This time it's different," I insisted, the words feeling thin and hollow, even to my own ears. "It's a strategic business opportunity." She just gave me a sad, knowing look. "For them, maybe. For you, it's just another audition for the role of daughter, and you know they never give you the part." Her words were prophetic. The first red flags appeared within weeks, bright scarlet against the backdrop of my spreadsheets. I had laid out a clear payment schedule for the deposits needed to secure the hotel, the venues, the private tours. The first deadline, a not insignificant 5-figure sum for the hotel suite block, came and went. I called my father. "Ah, yes, the money," he said, his voice airy and dismissive. "Bit of a cash flow crunch at the moment, sweetheart. A deal I was expecting to close got pushed back. You know how it is in the big leagues. Can't you, handle it? Float it from your company account for a bit? We're good for it. You know that." So I did. I put the Hotel de Russie suites on my company's Black American Express card. A week later, it was the deposit for the private after-hours Vatican tour. Same story. Just a temporary hiccup. Charlotte, take care of it. Then it was the caterer for the welcome lunch. Then the fleet of Mercedes vans for transportation. Each time, a new plausible-sounding excuse. Each time, I covered it, telling myself it was a necessary investment in the Davenport connection. One afternoon, Sarah walked into my office without knocking and dropped a thick stack of credit card statements on my polished desk. "An early birthday present for your father," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "I just wanted you to see, in black and white, what this strategic opportunity is costing us before we even get on the plane." The number at the bottom of the page was staggering. It was more than the net profit from our last 3 major events combined. The knot in my stomach tightened into a cold ball of ice. "They'll pay it back, Sarah," I said weakly. "Will they?" she countered, her eyes sharp. "Or will they just find a new way to need you?" Here, she slid her personal business card holder across the desk. Tucked inside was a card for one of the top commercial lawyers in Boston. Jessica Chin. "Just in case their memory gets foggy, call her. Please, Charlotte. As your friend and your partner, I'm begging you to protect the business, even if you won't protect yourself." I took the card, feeling a flush of shame. The real moment of truth, the one that should have made me cancel everything, came a week before we were due to leave. I had stopped by my parents' house in Chestnut Hill, a sprawling colonial they could no longer truly afford, to drop off their customized leather travel folios. They weren't home, but my mother had given me the code to the door. On the antique mahogany table in the grand entryway, amidst a pile of glossy catalogs and invitations, was a single, menacing-looking envelope. It was from a company I recognized with a sickening lurch, a high-level, notoriously aggressive debt collection agency, the kind that doesn't bother with polite phone calls. They're the corporate Grim Reapers. My hands trembled as I picked it up. My name wasn't on it, so it wasn't illegal to look. It wasn't even sealed properly. I slid the single sheet of paper out. The words printed in a stark, bold font seemed to leap off the page. And final notice of intent to lien. The amount was for a defaulted business loan, and it was well into 6 figures. They weren't just having a cash flow issue. They were standing on the edge of a financial abyss, and they were planning to use my company, my money, as a bridge to get to the other side. I felt a wave of nausea, hot and bitter. All my life, they had projected this image of effortless wealth and unassailable social standing. They'd funded Jason's endless string of failed startups, his expensive cars, his high-rent apartments. Jason, who had flamboyantly dropped out of 3 different colleges, each time with a fresh wave of parental cash to cushion the blow, and a party to celebrate his courage to follow his own path. I was suddenly thrown back to a memory from a Christmas about 5 years ago. I had just landed my first major corporate client. Feeling flush and full of love, I'd bought my father a vintage watch he'd admired for years. It cost a fortune, but I was so proud to give it to him. He'd opened it, given a cursory, "Very nice, dear," and then set it aside to rave about the cashmere scarf Jason had clearly picked up at the airport on his way home. A month later, I saw the same watch on the wrist of one of my father's business associates. He'd regifted it. Meanwhile, that cheap scarf was still draped over the armchair in his study. Standing there in their silent, opulent foyer, holding that terrifying letter, I realized nothing had ever changed. They didn't see me. They saw a function. They weren't proud of me. They were proud of what my success could do for them. My first instinct was to call them, to scream, to cancel the whole catastrophic trip. But then I thought of Davenport. I thought of the contracts I'd signed, the non-refundable deposits I'd paid. Canceling now would be a professional disaster for elite affairs. My reputation, the one thing I had built that was truly mine, would be in tatters. So I did something else. I went back to my car, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I pulled out the card Sarah had given me. I dialed the number for Jessica Chin. "Jessica," I said, my voice low and tight when she answered. "It's Charlotte Morgan. I need some advice." Sarah said, "You're the best." "She has good taste," Jessica replied, her voice calm and reassuringly competent. "What's the fire?" "Let's say a client, a high-value family client, is having me plan a major international event. And let's say I have concrete reason to believe this client is financially compromised and is misrepresenting their ability to pay. And let's say my company has already extended a very significant line of credit to secure the venues and services." There was a pregnant pause. "We're talking about your family, aren't we, Charlotte?" Jessica knew my history, the vague outlines of it, at least. I didn't answer directly. I need to know my options. I can't back out without destroying my company's reputation. But I can't let Elite Affairs be the fall guy for their bad debts. How do I protect my business? She spent the next 20 minutes walking me through it with the precision of a surgeon. Contracts, liability clauses, the specific, powerful language of being the official guarantor of payment. By the time we hung up, I had a plan, a detailed multi-step contingency plan, an emergency escape hatch lined with legal steel. It was a plan designed to surgically remove my company's liability while leaving the client fully exposed to the consequences of their own actions. I saved the document she sent over to a secure folder on my laptop. It was titled the Contingency Protocol Morgan. I prayed to God I would never have to open it again. When I boarded the plane to Rome a week later, I was a woman torn in two. One half was the hopeful daughter, the eternal optimist, clinging to the paper-thin chance that this grand gesture would finally earn her a real seat at the table. The other half was the cautious, hardened CEO, her hand hovering over the big red button of her contingency plan, ready to burn it all down to save the kingdom she had built. I still didn't know which one of them would be flying home. The moment we landed at Fiumicino Airport in Rome, the charade began to fray at the edges. The magnificent panoramic suites I had booked at the Hotel de Russi, overlooking the Piazza del Popolo, were met with my mother's faint, damning praise. "Oh, they're lovely, Charlotte, a little ostentatiously modern for my tastes, but I'm sure we'll manage." It was her classic way of taking something wonderful and diminishing it with a sigh. My father was immediately, transparently preoccupied. "So this Davenport fellow," he said, unpacking his suitcase and not even glancing at the spectacular view. "When are we meeting him? I've drafted some talking points for Jason. The boy has a natural charm, a real people person. He could really win Davenport over." I stared at him, my jaw tight. "For Jason? Dad, I'm the one who has the potential business relationship. Elite Affairs is the entity he's interested in. My work is the calling card." Richard waved a dismissive hand as if swatting away a fly. Details. Semantics. What matters is getting a Morgan in the door. Jason has the charisma. You have the organizational skills. We all have our roles to play, sweetheart. It was a slap in the face, but I swallowed the sting. I told myself to focus on the prize. The meeting was what mattered. I just had to get through the week. The first scheduled event on our bespoke itinerary was a private after-hours tour of the Borghese Gallery and Museum. I had arranged for one of the city's most sought-after art historians to be our personal guide. Our meeting time was 7 p.m. sharp. At 6:45, I was waiting in the hotel's lush lobby, the custom-printed welcome packets in a neat folio under my arm. By 7, I was conspicuously alone. I called my mother's cell phone, a prickle of anxiety climbing my neck. "Oh, Charlotte," she chirped, her voice bright and distant over the sound of clinking glasses and laughter. "Did we not tell you? We decided to go for an aperitivo first. That lovely little cafe near the Pantheon you recommended on your list. We're all here. It's marvelous. Why don't you just meet us back at the hotel later? Don't worry about the tour. Richard will smooth it over." I could hear Jason laughing loudly in the background. "Tell her to have fun with the statues," he shouted, followed by a peal of feminine laughter I assumed belonged to Vanessa. I stood there in the echoing grandeur of the lobby, the tickets clutched in my hand, as the tour I had spent a month and a small fortune arranging started without me. I told myself it was a simple miscommunication, a thoughtless oversight. But deep down I knew better. It was a power play, a reminder of my role. The facilitator of their fun, not a participant in it. The next day was the Vatican tour. This time I was prepared. I confirmed the time with everyone that morning, looking each of them in the eye. 2 p.m., I said clearly. At 1:30, I sent a group text to the family chat I'd created. "Leaving for the Vatican in 15 minutes. Meet in the lobby. The guide is on a strict schedule." Crickets. No response. At 1:45, I went to my parents' suite and knocked firmly. My Aunt Carol, my mother's sister and professional pot stirrer, opened the door. She was dressed for sightseeing, a silk scarf knotted artfully at her neck. "Charlotte," she said, her smile full of cloying fake sympathy. "They've already left, dear. Richard was getting antsy. Wanted to beat the crowds. You know how he is." "But the tour isn't until 2, I said, my voice strained. "I have the guide. I have the tickets. We have a prearranged entry." She patted my arm, her touch condescending. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about it. Your father can be very persuasive. I'm sure they'll manage just fine. You've done so much work already, dear. You should put your feet up and have a nice cappuccino. You look tired. That evening, at a family dinner at a noisy, cheerful trattoria, one that I, of course, picked up the check for, Jason regaled the table with an exaggerated story of their Vatican adventure. You should have seen Dad, he chortled, wine sloshing precariously in his glass as he gesticulated wildly. He basically charmed the pants off one of the Swiss guards, and the guy let us slip into another group. We didn't need the fancy tour planner and her special guide after all. My father beamed with pride, basking in the glow of his son's admiration. Sometimes, darling, he said with a wink, you just need the Morgan touch. It's about people, not plans. I sat there, pushing a piece of perfect cacio e pepe around my plate. My appetite was gone. I felt like a ghost at the table. Invisible. I was their concierge, their travel agent, their bank. Nothing more. A new, particularly galling slight occurred the next day. I had been on the phone for 2 hours in my hotel room, sorting out a last-minute floral crisis for the birthday dinner, when I came downstairs to find my mother, Aunt Carol, and Vanessa returning to the hotel, laden with shopping bags from Gucci, Prada, and Fendi. My mother was holding up a particularly expensive-looking handbag. What do you think, Charlotte? She asked breezily. I put it on the room. The concierge said it was all linked to the event account you set up. So convenient. I stared at the bag, then at her. Mom, that account is for event-related expenses, for the party, not for personal shopping sprees. She waved her hand dismissively. Oh, pooh, it's all just money, isn't it? Don't be such a stick in the mud. It's important for us to look our best for your father's big night. We're representing the family. The implication was clear. I was the worker bee. They were the queen and her court. And it was my job to fund their lifestyle. But the final, unforgivable blow, the one that severed the last thread of hope I had, came on the third day. It was the day before my father's birthday dinner. My sole strategic goal for this entire expensive nightmare was the meeting with Robert Davenport. I had managed to secure a tentative coffee meeting with his executive assistant for the morning after the birthday party, a short hop away in Florence. My plan was simple and professional. Use the magnificent dinner as a showcase of my company's flawless execution and capabilities, then seal the deal for his business the next day. I had told my father this. He had promised, with a hand over his heart, to help facilitate it. That afternoon, I was returning to the hotel after a final walkthrough at La Pergola. As my taxi turned onto the glamorous Via del Babuino, I saw them. My father and Jason. They were standing on the sidewalk under the shade of a striped awning, deep in animated conversation with another man. The man was stout, with a predator's slick smile and an ostentatiously expensive suit. I recognized him instantly, with a jolt of cold shock. It was Marcus Thorne, a notorious corporate raider and Robert Davenport's most hated rival. I froze, telling the driver to pull over. I ducked down in my seat, my heart pounding a sick rhythm against my ribs. I watched as my father clapped Thorne on the back, with a familiarity that spoke of more than a chance meeting. I saw Jason laughing, that easy, charming laugh he used to get whatever he wanted, shaking Thorne's hand with a confident flourish. They were pitching him. I could see it in their body language, in the ingratiating way they leaned in. They were using the prestige of the trip I had arranged, the very air of success I had paid for, to court my target's mortal enemy. It wasn't just incompetence. It wasn't just selfishness. This was a deliberate, calculated betrayal. They weren't just ignoring my goals. They were actively, willfully sabotaging them for a shot at a different prize. In that moment, watching them fawn over Marcus Thorne like he was the king of the world, I knew. The hopeful daughter, the one who thought this trip could change 4 decades of history, died a quiet death on that Roman street. I walked back to the hotel in a complete daze. The city's ancient beauty, the vibrant life teeming on its streets, was lost on me. All I could feel was a cold, hard anger solidifying in my chest. It wasn't the hot, explosive anger of my youth, the kind that burned out quickly. This was different. This was glacial. It was calm. It was precise. It was the anger of a CEO whose flagship project had just been intentionally scuttled by her own board of directors. I went up to my silent, beautiful suite, opened my laptop, and pulled up the secure folder I had created. I clicked on the file titled Contingency Protocol Morgan. I reread the precise, legalistic steps Jessica Chin and I had outlined. Then I opened a new email. My fingers, steady and sure, flew across the keyboard. It was a short, simple message to my lawyer. Jessica, it read, Execute the contingency plan effective immediately upon my final confirmation. Stand by. I hit send. Then I began to get ready for my father's 70th birthday dinner. I showered, I shaved, I put on my most expensive suit. I chose my most understated, powerful tie. I was going to attend the party. I was going to play my part. They had assigned me the role of the fool. They had no idea I was about to rewrite the entire play, and they were about to be recast as the villains in their own tragedy. The 10-minute taxi ride to La Pergola was the calmest I had felt in years. The usual knot of anxiety in my stomach, the one that had taken up permanent residence since childhood, was gone. In its place was a strange cold clarity. The decision had been made. The pieces were in place. All that was left was the execution. The city of Rome, a sprawling tapestry of history, of empires that had risen with glory and fallen with breathtaking speed, sped past my window. Tonight, I felt like I was about to personally oversee the fall of my own small toxic empire. There was no more hope to be crushed. There was no more anxiety to manage. There was only a single clear objective. I was no longer a daughter trying to earn her father's love. I was a CEO protecting her most valuable asset, her own dignity. As I entered the restaurant, the opulent decor and hushed atmosphere that had once seemed intimidating now felt like nothing more than a stage. My stage. Marco greeted me at the host stand, his face a mask of perfect professional discretion, but I saw a flicker of understanding, of solidarity in his eyes. We had spoken briefly and cryptically on the phone after I sent the initial email to Jessica. He didn't know the details, but he knew a financial storm was brewing, and he knew I was the one holding the lightning. He was a professional caught in the middle, and he respected a woman who handled her business, even if that business was about to get very, very ugly. "Ms. Morgan," he said with a slight bow. "Good evening." "Good evening, Marco," I replied, my voice even. "Showtime." He nodded once, a silent confirmation, and led me toward the terrace. When I stepped out into the warm evening air, the scene was exactly as I had pictured it. The laughter, the champagne flowing freely, the stunning panoramic backdrop of the Vatican lit against the night sky. It all felt like a movie set, meticulously designed for maximum drama. I was the actor stepping onto the set, ready to deliver the line that would change the entire plot. My eyes scanned the scene, and then I saw him, Robert Davenport. He was sitting at a discreet corner table with his elegant wife, the very picture of quiet power. He was the reason I had endured all of this. He was the prize my father had dangled, then tried to snatch away. He caught my eye as I entered, and his face broke into a small, genuine smile. He gave me a respectful nod of acknowledgement, a greeting between peers. I nodded back, a silent promise of the professionalism he was about to witness. My father, busy holding court, gesturing wildly as he told some loud, self-aggrandizing story from his youth, didn't even notice the exchange. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. The man whose approval he was performing for was acknowledging the daughter he was about to publicly cast out. And then the moment arrived. I approached the table. Jason's snide comment cut through the air. "Well, look what the cat dragged in." The party planner finally arrives to check on her work. My mother's brittle smile, a socialite's weapon, hung in the air like a poisonous perfume. We needed the room for Jason's new girlfriend. Vanessa, we simply had to make her feel welcome, you understand? The ripple of polite, complicit laughter. The laughter that sealed my 42 years of exclusion. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. It was a public declaration of my status. I was secondary. I was disposable. I let my gaze travel slowly around the table, meeting each of their eyes for a brief, telling moment. My father, Richard, who finally looked at me but couldn't hold my gaze, a flicker of something. Was it shame or just annoyance at this inconvenient interruption? My mother, Eleanor, her face a perfect mask of social grace, utterly, willfully oblivious to the profound cruelty of her own words. My brother Jason looking triumphant, his arm draped possessively around Vanessa's bare shoulders, a conqueror displaying his prize. Vanessa herself just looked bewildered, a pretty pawn in a game she didn't understand. And my Aunt Carol, a look of faux concern on her face that didn't quite reach her cold, calculating eyes. In that singular, crystal-clear moment, I saw them for what they truly were, not a family. They were a board of directors for a failing, morally bankrupt corporation, willing to cannibalize any asset, sacrifice any principle, to maintain the illusion of their own importance. And I was the asset they had just foolishly, fatally written off. The old Charlotte, the one who had walked into this restaurant just a few days ago, full of hope, would have argued. She would have raised her voice, her face flushed with hurt and anger. She would have demanded an explanation, pleaded for a crumb of respect. She would have given them the satisfaction of a messy, emotional scene. But the old Charlotte was gone. She had died on a street corner, watching her father embrace her enemy. The new Charlotte simply smiled. A small, tight, dangerous smile. "Seems I'm not family," I said. The words were quiet, almost inaudible. But in the sudden lull in their conversation, they landed with the force of a gavel. I turned away from their stunned faces and faced Marco, who had moved discreetly closer, anticipating the need for his presence. My voice shifted, shedding all traces of the wounded daughter and adopting the crisp, cool authority of the founder and CEO of Elite Affairs. The voice I used to command boardrooms, to negotiate multi-million-dollar contracts, the voice of a woman in absolute control. "Marco," I said, my voice clear and caring enough to be heard by everyone at the table, "it appears there has been a significant change in the guest list. From this moment on, please direct all inquiries, all requests, and especially all charges directly to the party's designated host, Mr. Richard Morgan." I met my father's gaze, which was now filled with sputtering, confused fury. He started to speak, to bluster, but I cut him off with a look. "I will return later," I said, my words precise and cold as ice, "to settle the final financial arrangements for my company." And then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I could feel their collective stare on my back, a tangible force of shock and indignation. I could sense their confusion curdling into irritation. Let them. Let them stew in it. Let them enjoy their petty little victory. Let them toast to my father's health with the vintage champagne I had personally selected. Let them laugh and drink and feel powerful. They thought this was the end of a minor, embarrassing confrontation. In reality, the overture was just over. The main performance was about to begin, and they had no idea they were the ones on stage, with the house lights about to come up and the whole world watching. I didn't go far. I had no intention of leaving the theater before the final act. Marco escorted me to the restaurant's private bar, a dimly lit, wood-paneled sanctuary reserved for VIPs. He poured me a generous glass of Macallan 18 without me having to ask. "The terrace has a clear view from the west window, should you wish to observe, Ms. Morgan," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Your instructions have been communicated to the staff." "Thank you, Marco," I said. "Your professionalism is, as always, appreciated." He gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod and disappeared, leaving me alone with my drink and my thoughts. I sat in a plush leather armchair, the expensive scotch warming my chest, and I waited. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply resolved. I felt like a surgeon before a complex operation, all emotions set aside, focused only on the precise, necessary cuts that had to be made. I gave them an hour and a half, a full 90 minutes. Enough time for the exquisite main courses to be served and cleared. Enough time for the decadent, multi-layered chocolate hazelnut cake, my father's favorite, a detail I had painstakingly arranged, to be presented with a flourish. Enough time for the celebratory toasts, full of false sentiment and inflated self-importance, to be made. Enough time for them to feel completely, utterly secure in their petty victory, to have dismissed my exit as a childish tantrum, to have forgotten entirely about the daughter they had so casually cast aside. When I judged the time was right, when the energy of the party had crested and was settling into a self-congratulatory haze, I left the bar and walked back toward the terrace. I didn't go directly to their table. I positioned myself near the grand stone entrance, partially hidden by a large marble pillar, a silent observer, watching the final scene of the play I had written. The tableau was one of supreme, smug satisfaction. My father was leaning back heavily in his chair, a fat, expensive cigar, probably one he'd charged to my event account, jutting from his mouth. Jason was whispering something in Vanessa's ear, his hand tracing lazy circles on her back, making her giggle. My mother was examining her diamond bracelet as if seeing it for the first time, a small, self-satisfied smile playing on her lips. They looked like Roman royalty in a painting, decadent and oblivious, just moments before the fall. Then I saw Marco. He moved with the silent grace of a dancer, making his way through the tables, a dark leather billfold held carefully in his hand. This was it, the inciting incident of the end. He presented the bill to my father with a theatrical, deferential bow. "Mr. Morgan," he said, "I hope everything this evening was to your complete satisfaction." Excellent, Marco. Truly excellent, my father boomed, his voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. He took the billfold but didn't even bother to open it. That was a task for lesser men. He simply pulled a gleaming black American Express card from his wallet and handed it over with a flick of his wrist. Take care of this, will you, and be generous with the staff. Marco took the card and retreated. The table continued their lazy, contented conversation, utterly oblivious. A few minutes passed, long enough for the transaction to be run. Then Marco returned. His face was a perfect, unreadable mask of professional regret. "Mr. Morgan," he said, his voice quiet, but carrying an unmistakable firmness that cut through the low chatter. "I'm very sorry, but this card has been declined." A sudden, sharp hush fell over the table. The laughter died in their throats. "Declined?" Richard sputtered, his face beginning to flush a deep, angry red. "That's utterly impossible. There must be a mistake. Run it again." "We have, sir," Marco said, his voice still maddeningly calm. 3 times, in fact. The charge has not been authorized by the issuing bank. "Well, for God's sake, use another card," my mother snapped, her voice high and shrill. She fumbled in her purse and pushed her own platinum card across the table. "This one has no limit." Marco took the card without a word. A minute later, which felt like an eternity, he was back. His expression had not changed. "My apologies, madam. This one has also been declined." A visible wave of panic began to flicker across my father's face. He looked at Jason, a silent plea in his eyes. Jason just held up his hands and shrugged, a smirk playing on his lips. "Don't look at me. I'm living the artist's life, beautifully broke." The other guests at the table, my parents' supposed lifelong friends, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Their smiles were frozen, their eyes darting anywhere but at my father. The air was thick with a delicious, suffocating tension. This was my cue. I stepped out from behind the pillar and began to walk, calmly, deliberately, toward the table. Every eye on the terrace, it seemed, turned to follow my progress. The silence was now absolute, broken only by the faint sound of my leather-soled shoes on the stone floor. I stopped beside my father's chair. He stared up at me, his face a turbulent storm of fury, confusion, and dawning horror. "What is the meaning of this, Charlotte?" he hissed, his voice low and shaking with rage. "Is this some kind of sick, twisted joke? Did you do this?" I didn't even look at him. I addressed Marco, my tone cool and professional. "Marco, is there a problem with the bill for my event?" Marco, the consummate professional, played his part with understated brilliance. "Ms. Morgan," he said, turning to me as if I were a rescuing hero. "As you know, the initial significant deposits for this event were guaranteed by your company, Elite Affairs. However, as per your legal instructions received at 8:15 p.m. this evening, that guarantee was formally revoked for any and all charges incurred beyond the initial deposit. The remaining balance for tonight's dinner, the vintage wines, the floral arrangements, and the service charge, is quite substantial, and Mr. Richard Morgan's provided methods of payment have proven to be insufficient." My father shot to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the stone. "This is an outrage, a betrayal. My daughter is the planner. She is responsible for all of this." I finally turned my head and looked at him. My expression was as blank as a fresh sheet of paper. "No, father, I was the planner. But you, as you so loudly declared to your friends all night, are the host. And as the host, the bill and the embarrassment belongs entirely to you." I let that sink in. "As per the signed event contract, which my lawyer has a notarized copy of, the guarantor can revoke financial liability at any time should the client, that's you, fail to meet their contractual or ethical obligations." I stepped back just enough for the entire terrace to hear the last line. "You failed on both counts." His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish gasping for air on the deck of a ship. And then the final, beautiful piece of my plan fell into place, as if on cue from a divine playwright. "Richard, is everything all right over here?" The voice was calm, measured, and radiated quiet power. Robert Davenport stood there, having risen from his table, a look of polite concern on his face. He looked from my fuming, speechless father to me, and his expression softened into one of friendly recognition. "Charlotte," he said, his voice warm, "good to see you. I didn't realize you were handling this particular party." He gestured with his chin toward my stunned family. He leaned in slightly, as if sharing a confidence. "Apologies for the disturbance. I trust these aren't the challenging clients you alluded to on our call last week?" The sound that escaped my father's throat was something between a gasp and a death rattle. His face, which had been bright red with anger, drained of all color. In a matter of seconds, it went from red to white to a sickly pale green. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a horror that was almost comical. They finally understood. In one clean, surgical, devastating move, I had not only cut them off financially, but I had also exposed their appalling, classless behavior to the one man in the world they desperately wanted to impress. I had shown him exactly who they were, and in doing so, I had shown him exactly who I was, the calm, competent professional standing tall in the wreckage of their chaos. I gave Mr. Davenport a small, appreciative smile. It was the first genuine smile I'd had all week. Mr. Davenport, pleasure to see you as always. And no, this matter is now fully resolved. I turned to my family and added, my voice ringing with finality. My business with these individuals, I said, has concluded. I extended my hand to Davenport. I look forward to our meeting in Florence tomorrow morning to discuss the new corporate events calendar. Davenport took my hand, his grip firm and decisive. As do I, Charlotte, as do I. I'll have my assistant confirm the car for you. He gave my father one last, long, dismissive glance, the kind of look you give something you found on the bottom of your shoe. And then he turned and returned to his table. The message couldn't have been clearer. The deal was dead. Their imagined connection, their last desperate hope for a social and financial lifeline, was gone. And I was the one who had taken it from them. I looked at my family. They were frozen in a silent scream of disbelief and utter, soul-crushing humiliation. The party was over. The laughter was gone. All that remained was the silence, the shame, and a very, very large bill that they had no possible way to pay. The silence on the terrace was a living, breathing thing. It pressed down on the table, heavy and suffocating. The other diners were engaged in a masterclass of feigned ignorance, studiously admiring the view or suddenly fascinated by their wine glasses. But every single person was listening. The Morgans were the evening's unscheduled and far more interesting floor show. The silence was finally broken by the quiet, mercilessly polite voice of Marco. Mr. Morgan, he said, addressing my father, his tone perfectly neutral, yet carrying the weight of a judge's sentence. The matter of the outstanding bill remains. The restaurant will require payment in full, or a secure guarantee of payment, before you and your party can depart. My father looked like he had been physically struck by an invisible force. All the bluster, all the arrogance, all the performative bonhomie had evaporated, leaving behind the raw, pathetic panic of a man who has built his life on a foundation of bluffs, only to finally be called. He sank back into his chair, which groaned under his weight. He looked at my mother, his eyes pleading. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice cracked. "Your jewelry, the necklace." My mother let out a small, strangled sob, a sound of pure, undiluted horror. "Richard, no, not my grandmother's necklace. It's all I have left of her." "We have no choice," he hissed back, his voice a venomous, desperate whisper. "Do you want to be arrested? Do you want to be escorted out of here by the carabinieri? Here, in front of everyone?" The last of their guests at the table, a couple who had been friends with my parents for 30 years, began to discreetly excuse themselves. "So sorry, Richard, Eleanor," the man murmured, not quite making eye contact. "We have an early flight, terrible jet lag." They fled without a backward glance, like rats from a sinking ship. Soon it was just my family, isolated and exposed at their table of half-eaten desserts and completely shattered pride. I watched for another moment, a detached clinical observer. I saw my mother, with fingers that trembled so badly she could barely work the clasp, begin to remove the magnificent diamond necklace from around her neck. I saw my Aunt Carol, who had been silent throughout the entire ordeal, discreetly trying to call a taxi on her phone, her face a pinched mask of self-preservation. And I saw Jason, for the first time in his pampered, privileged life, looking utterly, completely lost, with no one to bail him out, no easy lie to tell. Vanessa had vanished so quietly I hadn't even seen her go. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel a rush of victorious joy, but I didn't. I felt nothing, only quiet, empty finality, a sense of profound exhaustion. I had won, but the victory felt like ashes in my mouth. This was the family I had spent a lifetime trying to please. Watching their pathetic, ugly downfall was like watching a part of my own history burn away. It was a necessary, cauterizing fire, but it wasn't pleasant. I turned and left them there. I didn't need to see the humiliating negotiation with Marco, the appraisal of the necklace, the final degrading settlement. My part in the play was done. I went back to the hotel. It took me less than 30 minutes to pack my single suitcase. Everything was already neat, already organized. I had already checked out electronically. My pre-booked car to the airport hotel, where I would stay before my early flight to Florence, was waiting. As I was standing in the magnificent lobby, waiting for the bellman to confirm my car had arrived, they stormed in. They must have found a taxi with astonishing speed. Richard's face was blotchy and purple with rage. Eleanor was weeping openly, her face a wreck of smeared mascara. Jason looked like a thundercloud about to burst. "You!" my father snarled, pointing a shaking, accusatory finger at me. His voice echoed in the cavernous lobby, turning the heads of other guests. "You did this. You planned this. You humiliated us. You ruined me." I didn't respond. I just stood there by my luggage, my face as impassive as stone. I refused to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. "After everything we've done for you," my mother cried, her voice rising hysterically, "this is how you repay us? By shaming your own father in front of his oldest friends? In front of Robert Davenport?" I finally spoke, my voice dangerously quiet. "The friends who abandoned you the second the bill came?" I asked. "The Robert Davenport you were actively trying to sell out to his biggest rival behind my back? That stopped them cold." My father's face went from angry to guilty in a heartbeat. He knew that I knew. The realization that his betrayal had been discovered seemed to wound him more than the public humiliation. "We gave you everything," Jason chimed in, stepping forward to defend them, his voice full of righteous indignation. "My whole life, I've had to watch them bend over backwards for you, for your fancy company, for your needs." I almost laughed out loud. The delusion was so complete, so perfect, it was almost a work of art. "Jason," I said, looking my brother directly in the eye, for what felt like the first time in our lives, "you have never, not once in your life, had to watch anyone do anything for me. You have lived your entire existence on a plush cushion of their money and my hard work. That ends tonight." I turned my attention back to my parents. "This was never about a seat at a table," I said, my voice gaining strength with every word, ringing with 4 decades of suppressed truth. "This was about respect, a simple, basic respect you have never once shown me. Not when I graduated, not when I started my business from my tiny apartment with a secondhand computer. Not ever. You don't see me as a daughter. You see me as a resource, an emergency fund, a line of credit with a familiar face." I picked up the handle of my suitcase. "My lawyer, Jessica Chin, will be in contact with you in the coming days," I said, my tone formal and impersonal, as if I were closing a business deal with strangers. "She will be handling the recovery of the outstanding debts owed to my company for the initial substantial deposits on this trip. I would strongly advise you to take her call." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a single, crisp business card, Jessica's. I placed it on the concierge's marble counter in front of my father. "Don't you dare walk away from us, Charlotte," Eleanor shrieked, her voice cracking. "We are your family." I paused at the hotel's gleaming revolving door. I looked back at the 3 of them, a pathetic, broken tableau of entitlement and ruin, huddling together under the cold light of the lobby chandelier. "I already did," I said, my voice soft but final. "A long, long time ago. You just didn't notice until the money ran out." And I walked out into the cool Roman night, the door revolving behind me, shutting them out of my life for good. The meeting with Robert Davenport in his sun-drenched Florence office was everything my disastrous family dinner was not. It was respectful, professional, productive. He was a sharp, old-school, no-nonsense businessman who appreciated the quiet, decisive way I had handled the situation at the restaurant. He didn't press for details. He didn't need to. He'd seen all he needed to see. A man who can't control his own family, who creates that kind of public spectacle, can't be trusted to control a billion-dollar portfolio, he'd said, stirring his espresso with a tiny silver spoon. "You, on the other hand, showed me everything I needed to know about your character, Charlotte. You're calm under pressure, you're prepared, and you're not afraid to make a hard decision to protect your interests. That's who I want handling my brand." By the time I left Florence, I had a signed letter of intent for a multi-year, 7-figure contract for Elite Affairs to handle all of Davenport Capital's corporate events, from their annual shareholder meetings to their exclusive executive retreats. It was the biggest, most prestigious deal in my company's history. My victory was absolute, and it was a victory I had earned. not by luck, but by demonstrating the very competence my family had always dismissed. The months that followed were a blur of intense, joyous work and a strange, new, intoxicating feeling: freedom. I poured all the energy I had, once wasted, trying to win my family's elusive approval into my business. Without the constant drain of their drama, their demands, their subtle and not so subtle belittlements, I felt lighter, more focused, more creative than ever before. Elite affairs flourished. We hired new staff, brilliant young planners who were hungry and passionate. We opened a second office in New York City to better serve our expanding East Coast clientele. I was working harder than ever, but for the first time, the work felt entirely like my own. I didn't hear a word from my family. The silence was a gift, but I heard about them. The story of their Roman disaster had trickled back to the insular social scene of Boston, likely carried by the friends who had fled the scene. But it wasn't the dinner itself, the story of the missing seat and the unpaid bill, that truly ruined them. It was the financial instability that the incident had so brutally exposed. About 6 months after Rome, I was scrolling through the Wall Street Journal online when I saw a headline that made my blood run cold for a second before turning to ice. Davenport Capital scraps, proposed merger, citing leadership instability and financial red flags at partner firm. The partner firm was a boutique investment house where my father had worked as a senior consultant for the last decade. The proposed merger had been his golden parachute, his ticket to a lavish and comfortable retirement. Davenport's public vote of no confidence had killed it instantly and spectacularly. That was the first domino to fall. A few weeks after that, Sarah forwarded me a real estate listing from a high-end Boston brokerage. She didn't add any comment. She didn't need to. It was my childhood home in Chestnut Hill. The photos were cold and empty. The description read, "Bank-owned property, motivated to sell." The bank had foreclosed. The house of cards, built on lies and propped up by my money for so long, had well and truly collapsed. I felt a pang of something, a strange hollow ache in my chest. But it wasn't pity. It wasn't grief. It was a distant, clinical sadness, the way you might feel reading about a historical tragedy that happened to people you'd only read about in books. It was about a life I used to know. I decided then that I needed to ensure all ties were formally and legally severed for good. I didn't want some old forgotten document, some youthful co-signature on a loan, making me liable for their spiraling, self-inflicted debts. Jessica did some digging and advised me that the cleanest way to ensure my complete separation was to understand the full history of the family's finances. She suggested I reach out to my father's estranged brother, my Uncle Robert. He had famously and acrimoniously cut ties with Richard 20 years ago, and might know if there were any skeletons in the family's financial closet. I found him living a quiet life as a woodworker in Vermont. I drove up on a crisp autumn Saturday, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and purpose. He was a kinder, softer, sadder version of my father. He listened patiently as I gave him the abridged version of the story, his face grim. "Let me guess," he said finally, wiping his hands on a sawdust-covered rag. "Richard promised you the world, used your money, positioned himself as the magnanimous patriarch, and then acted like he was doing you the favor all along." "That about sums it up perfectly," I said, stunned by his accuracy. "He did the same thing to me with our own father's inheritance," Robert said, his voice heavy with old pain. "But there's something else you need to know, Charlotte. The reason Jason has always been the golden child, the reason they've always protected him and indulged him, it's not because your father loves him more. It's because your father owns him." He then told me a story that made my blood freeze. A story from the late 90s, when Jason was in college and I was just starting my first job. My father, in a desperate attempt to cover some massive illegal trading losses, had committed a serious act of securities fraud. The SEC was closing in, and he was facing jail time and professional ruin. At the last minute, Jason, who was barely 20 at the time, agreed to take the fall. He signed a confession, claiming it was all his mistake, a youthful, foolish error in judgment. As a first-time offender with a promising future and a high-priced lawyer my father paid for, he got off with a massive fine and community service. Richard's career was saved, his reputation was intact. But from that day forward, he was indebted to Jason. His endless favoritism wasn't love. It was a guilt payment. It was a lifelong bribe to ensure Jason's silence and complicity. Hearing it all laid out so plainly, the last piece of the twisted puzzle of my family clicked into place. They weren't just dysfunctional. They were pathologically corrupt. Their entire family unit was built on a foundation of lies and a shared dirty secret. Jason wasn't the golden child. He was the willing accomplice, the paid-off co-conspirator. And I was always the outsider, the other, because I wasn't part of their conspiracy. My success, my integrity, it was a silent reproach to their entire way of life. I left Vermont that evening with a profound sense of clarity. The sadness was gone, replaced by a clean, sharp sense of release. A year after the Rome incident, I was back in Italy, this time in Florence, overseeing a spectacular wedding for my new star client, Davenport Capital's youngest board member. The work was demanding, the standards exacting, but it was deeply fulfilling. One evening after the day's work was done, I wandered into a small, quiet gallery in the Oltrarno district. The art was stunning, a collection of modern sculptures that seemed to both embrace and defy gravity. The gallery's curator, a woman with intelligent, laughing eyes and a passion for her work that was palpable, came over to talk to me about a piece I was admiring. Her name was Isabella. We talked for over an hour about art, about life, about risk, about the courage it takes to build something new from scratch. We had dinner that night, and the night after that. For the first time in my adult life, I was with someone who saw me, just me. Not my company, not my bank account, not my utility. Our relationship was built on a foundation of mutual respect and shared passions, not on obligation, guilt, and a tangled web of ancient secrets. One crisp autumn evening, as Isabella and I were sitting in our Florentine apartment, planning a weekend trip to a vineyard in Tuscany, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. My heart gave a familiar lurch, but I opened it. It was from my mother. "Charlotte, it's your mother. I found this number through a friend of a friend. I'm sure you're very busy with your important new life, but I need to talk to you. Your father is not well. He's a broken man. We have nothing left. After everything we've sacrificed for your brother over the years, after everything he did to protect your father, surely you can find it in your heart to help us. It's the least you can do. You owe us." I read the message twice, then a third time. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. The guilt-tripping, the complete lack of remorse or self-awareness, the casual rewriting of history. It was all there. You owe us. I handed the phone to Isabella. She read it, her expression growing grim. She looked at me, her eyes full of a fierce, protective light, and said the words that would become my mantra. "Your family's history is not your fault, Charlotte," she said softly but firmly, "but your future is entirely your choice." She was right, and for the first time, I felt strong enough to make that choice, without an ounce of doubt. I stood there in the warm light of our Florentine kitchen. The phone felt heavy and toxic in my hand. The words from my mother, typed out in stark black and white, felt like an anchor, a rusty chain trying to drag me back down into the murky, suffocating depths I had fought so hard and so long to escape. You owe us. The three most insidious and destructive words in the English language. For a split second, a ghost of the old Charlotte flickered within me, the little girl who just wanted her mom to think she was good enough, the young woman who ached for a single, unqualified word of approval from her father. A phantom wave of the old, familiar conditioned guilt washed over me. It was a powerful current, one that had dictated the course of my life for 40 years. Then I looked across the room at Isabella. I saw the strength and honesty in her eyes. I looked around the beautiful, peaceful home we were building together, a life founded on partnership and truth. I thought of my company, the incredible team that depended on me, the success we had earned through integrity and relentless hard work. I thought about the profound, simple peace I felt every morning when I woke up, a feeling of calm and possibility that was once completely foreign to me. I knew what I had to do. The choice was clear. My thumb hovered over the screen. I didn't type a reply. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. A conversation would just be an invitation for more poison. An argument would be a colossal waste of breath. Engaging at all would be letting them win. It would be an admission that they still had power over me. My finger moved to the top of the screen, to the contact information for the unknown number. A small menu of options appeared. My thumb moved to the word block. I tapped it. "Block this caller?" The phone asked. A final chance to reconsider. "You will not receive phone calls, messages, or FaceTime from people on the block list." I tapped block. Then I went to my contacts and found the old numbers for my mother, my father, and my brother. I did the same for each one. The block, block, block. It was a quiet, simple, anticlimactic act. just a few taps on a pane of glass. But it felt more powerful than any screaming match, more final than any slammed door. It wasn't an act of anger or revenge. It was an act of profound self-preservation, an act of choosing my own peace over their perpetual chaos, an act of choosing my future over their toxic past. Later that evening, Isabella and I were walking along the river Arno. The Ponte Vecchio lit up like a string of floating jewels behind us. The air was cool and crisp, and the city was humming with a gentle, ancient energy. "Are you okay?" she asked, slipping her hand into mine. "I'm better than okay," I said, and I was surprised by the deep, resonant truth of the words. For the first time in my life, I feel free. I realized in that moment that the ultimate revenge wasn't watching them fall. It wasn't the financial victory or the public humiliation. The ultimate revenge was being so happy, so whole, and so at peace that their existence, their approval, their drama no longer affected me. My success, my love, my life. These were things they couldn't touch, couldn't tarnish, and could no longer lay a single claim to. My value was never something they could bestow upon me. It was something I had to build for myself once I was finally brave enough to walk away from the people who refused to see it. Family, I learned, isn't about the blood you share. It's about the people who show up, the people who lift you up, the people who give you a seat at their table, not because they feel obligated, but because they can't imagine the table being complete without you. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it resonated with you in some way. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to make a hard choice between your family and your own well-being? Share your story in the comments below. I read them all. And don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss what's next.